How do we combat the media blackout of our candidates? This is an excellent question. This is a problem that we face. It's probably one of our single biggest questions is that single biggest problems is that the media doesn't want people to hear us. At least not for long. They'll bring us on long enough to try to discredit us, but they don't want to hear libertarian ideas because the major media is owned by a handful of crony corporations who have a vested interest in keeping this system going that the Republicans and Democrats maintain to our detriment and to the benefit of them. And so they don't want us in because they know we'll break up their gravy train. And so the best way around it is the good news is that TV media and major media is largely a dying medium. Every year, more and more people are getting their news from social media. They're getting their news from alternative and new media sources. And so we are being very active in getting in front of those sources and getting in front of as many eyes as possible. We have upcoming AMAs on Reddit. We have upcoming interviews that we can't talk about yet. We can't say it yet because they're still in the works, but some big name interviews that we have coming up. Joe is going to be everywhere. Joe is going to be interviewed quite a bit by some incredibly prominent people. And anyone who knows Joe Jorgensen knows that's a fantastic thing. Because when you have Joe on there explaining libertarian ideas, giving common sense libertarian solutions, detailing in a way that breaking down complex ideas in a way that's relatable to everyday Americans, and explaining how the Democrats and the Republicans have created problems that we are having to face every day, and how libertarian solutions, the solutions that Joe Jorgensen and I are pushing for, will solve those problems. It's going to awaken and open a lot of hearts and minds. And if we can get 15% and in the opinion polls and get on that debate stage, then it's over. Because Joe Jorgensen contrasted with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the American people are going to see very clearly that there's only one real viable choice there. That everything they've heard about third-party votes being a wasted vote and all of the lies and nonsense they've been fed, it's not true. They'll see why the lie was told to them. They'll see who the real option is there, and that option is Joe Jorgensen. And once that happens, the race is ours to lose. I think that will be an easy race to win. Once we've gotten on that debate and she's on there and Trump and Biden have nowhere to hide, it's going to be an easy win for us. Next question. What is your stance on the use of marijuana? So there's two questions there. One is my personal stance, and one is what Joe and my policy is regarding using marijuana. I personally, I've been sober for 14 years, so I certainly won't be using any marijuana. But Joe Jorgensen and I Joe believes that we should end the war on drugs. If you want to put marijuana in your body, that is your business. And when government steps in and tries to put a ban on that or a prohibition on that, we saw what happened with alcohol prohibition. They decided that alcohol was bad for you and that it was an immoral thing and that you shouldn't do it. And when they made it illegal, people kept drinking. Now they just did it illegally. And so what happened? The cartels, the rum runners, the alcohol bootleggers started making money. It brought more money to a criminal element. It made our communities less safe because now there was gangland warfare over turf that they were fighting over to be able to sell their alcohol. You had a growing distrust between the general public and the police because now instead of the police just being there to protect their lives and rights and freedoms, now the police were there to make sure they weren't drinking. And so there became a growing disconnect and a rift between law enforcement and the public that they were sworn to serve. And you saw that addiction was now stigmatized. So now if someone had an addiction and needed help, they weren't going to get help because they didn't want to get in trouble for the fact that they were addicted to alcohol in the first place. And so thankfully they ended the war on alcohol. Unfortunately, they did the same thing with weed and with drugs in general. And so we're seeing they are no longer where they are. It's a bad idea. Joe, streams down. Well, now it says it's back up. Is it back up? Okay. It is. Sorry, folks. We had some technical difficulties. Facebook is not cooperating with us. How interesting after talking about how we're going to break the media stranglehold that they start cutting us off. But it is working now. So back to the questions here. So what is Joe going to do to clean up the mess in Washington? Well, there's many messes in Washington. And so just a general breakdown of what Joe wants to do is end the wars, bring the troops home, audit and end the Fed, end the system of cronyism in government, end police brutality by ending qualified immunity so that bad police are held accountable, good police are rewarded instead of punished, and the rift between the police and the public can heal. End the duopoly stranglehold on electoral politics by ending the FEC's prohibitions and regulations and restrictions on third-party candidates that make it harder for them to be able to get ahead, and just in general break down all of the barriers that the Republicans and Democrats have set up to make our lives harder. Let's see what's the next one. We're getting a lot of question here. Already answered that. How does Joe Jorgensen plan to deal with racial tensions in America? Well, we're seeing this unfolding right now. We're seeing a public that is dealing with the fact that the bad big government solutions that have come from the Republicans and Democrats have led to the harmful and inequitable and abusive outcomes that one would expect from such arrangements. And so we're all being harmed, and there are some communities that are being harmed even disproportionately worse. People of color, gender and sexual minorities, and other marginalized communities. The poor, people that have less power and influence, who are being treated as largely, in some cases, as second-class citizens by a government that isn't that worried about them, doesn't really care about them. And so what Joe would do is to make sure that the civil rights of every single American in this country are being protected by removing things like the war on drugs, which is disproportionately used against people of color, but again, is being used against everyone. Ending a big thing that we don't talk about often with gun laws, which are rooted in originally stopping freed slaves from being able to defend themselves against the Klan, and to this day are still being disproportionately enforced against marginalized communities, the poor and communities of color and so forth. We'd end the war on guns by abolishing the ATF, and just a host of other things, removing the federal government's stranglehold on all of us, which unfortunately is also disproportionately used against communities that have the least ability to fend themselves against it. We would end things like cash bail, end things like no-knock raids, end things like civil forfeiture, where the government takes your money. If they suspect you of a crime, they go ahead and take everything you have. Then they send you to trial. So you haven't even been tried yet, much less found guilty of anything. And they use your own property and money to pay for your prosecution and leave you in a situation where you have no ability to be able to pay for your own defense. And if by some miracle you are found not guilty or the charges are dropped, you then have to sue to get your own stuff back, even though they've already acknowledged that they shouldn't have taken it to begin with. That is what civil asset forfeiture is. So we would end that. We would end qualified immunity. We would make it so that when an officer does something bad or when a government official does something bad, they can't simply say that they thought it was reasonable and have everything dropped and not be held accountable. So we would end that as well. So those are the things that we would do, because ultimately all of these problems, all of the problems with people of color and other communities that are being disproportionately harmed, they all boil down to too much power in the hands of too few people. And that is a system that has been set up by Republicans and Democrats, and we will break that up. That is Joe's plan. Do you have any campaign events coming up? Well, we do. We are going to be at the convention in the National Convention in Orlando, Florida. That is going to be from the 8th to the 12th. And then Joe and I will both be in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace for Freedom Fest. That is from the 14th to the 19th, I believe. And so we'll be at that in Vegas. And then we have some other stuff coming up soon that we're still working on. Obviously, it's a little difficult planning stuff when things are so up in the air with COVID-19 and potential for lockdowns and everything else and existing regulations and restrictions that are in place. But we are working on that. But we are doing the convention and Freedom Fest, and then we'll be working on some other stuff as well. Man, these are coming through. What is the party stance on abortion? So the official Libertarian Party stance is that we recognize that everyone on all sides of this subject have dearly held, strongly held beliefs that we respect and recognize that they are holding in good faith. We believe as libertarians, the Libertarian Party believes that the government should not be involved in an individual decision on abortion. We believe that because there are so many different widely held beliefs on it and there's not a real consensus on it, we believe that it should be left to the individual to determine based on their own values. Let's see what's else is here. What do you and Joe think about term limits? My understanding with Joe's campaign, I believe that she is in favor of term limits. I personally am in favor of term limits. I just want to make sure I'm not misrepresenting Joe's position on it. But I believe that she is in favor of term limits. Now, term limits, at least at the federal level, would require a constitutional amendment. But if Joe is in agreement with that, then I would certainly be in favor of both of us using that bully pulpit to encourage Congress to pass some term limits. Let's see what's here. Will y'all get rid of useless agencies? Yes, and a lot of them are useless. Joe will absolutely get rid of the useless agencies. What is Joe going to do to get on a debate stage? So I actually addressed this a little bit earlier, but I can talk about it again. If we can get 15%, that the Commission on Presidential Debates, their requirement to qualify to be on the debate stage with Joe Biden and Donald Trump is everyone who wants to be on it has to get 15% or more in, I believe, 5 reputable opinion polls. So like Gallup, Emerson, New York Times, Fox, those types of polls. These are randomly selected scientific polls that they use to determine. And so we would need to get 15% or more. In 2016, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld got 13% in one poll and 11% in another poll. And in the 4 years since then, more and more people are getting their news and media from social media, and fewer and fewer are getting it from the dying TV news media. So I believe that we will be able to get that 15%. Between the fact that the demographic has shifted more and more towards social media, and also the fact that we are presenting an incredibly dynamic and engaging and empathetic viral campaign to awaken the eyes and hearts and minds of the American people, I believe we'll be able to get that 15%. And if we can do that, like I said, get Joe Jorgensen on that stage, it's over. It's over. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are not going to be able to compete, period. What's going to happen to the income tax? Joe is going to get rid of the income tax. She has talked about abolishing the IRS and allowing you to keep your own money because it's yours and you earned it. Any plans to tour the United States? Yeah, again, we as much as we can. We already have 2 in place, Orlando, Florida for the convention and Freedom Fest in Vegas. It is hard to organize events when the vast majority of states still don't allow more than a handful of people to get together. So it's hard to organize big events, but we are working on that. Will Joe bring our troops home? Yes. Joe wants to end all of the wars, which she will be able to do as president. The Congress has, in their authorization of use of military force, they have basically given the president all of the latitude and the authority to decide whether a war goes on or not. And so Joe, her plan is to end the wars, to bring the troops home, and then like she likes to say, make America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral, keeping only a military that is sufficient to defend us against aggression. So if we don't have to worry about being invaded or anything like that. We will have a military sufficient to stop anyone who would want to invade us. But this ongoing perpetual war around the world is helping no one but the military contractors and the cronies who benefit from it, causing immeasurable harm around the world and to our own troops and veterans. Bringing the troops home doesn't just end the wars. It ends the epidemic of suicide among veterans. It ends the epidemic of addiction among veterans because of them dealing with chronic pain and PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. It ends so many problems that our troops and their families are having to face every single day by bringing them home where they belong, safely to their families, ending the wars, letting the healing begin. Let's see here. What are some federal agencies Joe will get rid of? Well, right off the bat, the ATF and the IRS. She also wants to audit and end the Fed. And there are probably at least a few others that she'll get rid of as well, but all of them are going to at least see some major reforms. For one thing, the Department of Justice will be a department of actual justice. Its main purpose will be to protect and defend your rights against those who would harm it, including bad actors in government. Let's see here. What is your position on vaccines? Joe and I believe that vaccines are a personal decision and that no one should force you whether or not to put something in your body. Um, uh, da, da, da. After getting rid of victimless crimes, will there be stricter punishment for actual violent crimes? I think, first of all, there's going to be a lot less violent crime. If you look at the sources of how crime happens, and when I'm saying crime, I'm talking about actual violent crime, crimes of theft. When someone has been criminalized for engaging in something that had no victim, they now go to prison. And when they go to prison, a lot of them weren't ready for prison. And because of the nature of how prison is, without getting too graphic, they go through a lot of really terrible stuff in there, and they have to become much harder and in many cases, much more violent and much more, jaded and brutal just to survive in there. And now they get out of prison. They've got all that trauma of that happening. It's changed them as a person. The world that they go into looks, depending on how long they've been in there, looks entirely different from the world that they left. They're many of them, they are the victims of identity theft, because while they were in prison, their social security number was out there floating around and they had no way to defend themselves against identity theft. So their credit's been ruined. They have a felony record, so they can't really get a good job. Most cases, they're on parole, so they can't leave the state. They don't really have a lot of options. They can either live on assistance in abject poverty, or they can end up getting involved in crime. There are some opportunities where they may be able to work legally, but not a lot. And it is very hard, depending on what they have on their record, for them to be able to get a job. And in some states, there are entire types of jobs they're not allowed to even seek. It's almost impossible for them to even get like a business license in many cases. So they're choosing between abject poverty or a life of crime. And sometimes that life of crime may be a life of violent crime. It may be theft. It's putting more people in a bad situation. And then, more than likely, they end up right back in prison. And so it's a terrible system. So in terms of what the punishment would be for individual crimes, I would say Joe and I believe that should be handled at the state level. States and communities should be deciding what their policing looks like, what their ways of interacting with the community look like, what punishments should be. We're not a fan of mandatory minimum sentencing. Mandatory minimum sentencing forces people into prison even when the judges don't want to give them those sentences, and instead see opportunities for them to go into diversion programs and get help and address the root cause of why it even happened in the first place. Mandatory minimum sentencing makes it so that judges have to pound that gavel and put people in prison for long periods of time that they never wanted to and that they didn't think was even necessary. Let's see here. Communication. How do you and Joe feel about COVID-19? Well, let's look at the history of what happened with COVID-19, why it's as bad as it is here. And it's bad here. I mean, we're facing a situation where other countries are talking about not allowing American citizens to travel to their countries because of how bad the outbreak is here. Well, how did we get here? How did the richest nation on earth, with one of the most robust healthcare systems, end up, or at least one of the most lavishly funded healthcare systems, end up with this situation? Well, let's look at what happened. When the first patients started going to doctors here in America and saying, "Doc, I don't feel too hot. I just got back from Wuhan, China. I'm feeling real sick, and I'm watching the news, and it sounds like I might have this coronavirus thing that I'm hearing about." It was illegal for doctors to test for it for the first 6 to 8 weeks that it was here. Why? Because the CDC had some ridiculous regulation that said that if you wanted to test for a novel virus, you had to go through a Byzantine months-long approval process to be able to test for that virus. And so what happened was people started going to their doctors and saying, "I need to get tested," and they couldn't test them. Now, thankfully, there was a doctor named Dr. Helen Chu at the University of Washington in Seattle, and doctors in other places as well, who, when the patients came to them and said, "I'm sick," they put their Hippocratic oath above that stupid regulation. They created the test kits, which apparently are easy to do if you know how to do such a thing. They tested their patients, and some of them came back positive. So they went to the CDC and said, "Hey, listen, we went ahead and tested these people. It's coming back positive. It's already here. We need to do something." Do you know what the CDC's initial response was to being told that the greatest viral pandemic of our time was on our shores? They told those doctors to tell no one, to destroy those test results, and to not tell or treat those patients, to send them home. And now you know why the outbreak's as bad as it is here. That's what I think about COVID-19. I think that it would be much more contained and we'd be in a much less restricted and much safer situation. And who knows how many tens or even hundreds of thousands of lives could have been saved if the government had simply allowed doctors to test and treat their patients. What a perfect example of how Democrats and Republicans have set up a system that puts a boot on the neck of the market, of the people trying to solve problems as they come up. So that's my feelings about COVID-19. If you don't get elected this year, will you be back again in 2024? We don't have that kind of talk here. We're getting elected in 2020. We're getting Joe on that debate stage. We're getting elected, and we're running for re-election for 2024. Actually, I don't want to speak for Joe. She may decide not to run for re-election. So I'm saying we're getting elected this year. That's how I'm wording that. How can the LP get down ticket candidates elected? This is a huge thing for Joe and I, is getting as many of those down ballot candidates elected. Now, some people will ask, what is down ballot? So it's everything below on the, if you look at a ballot and you keep going down, it starts with president, vice president, and then it goes to, if you have someone running for, Congress or Senate, and then it goes down to governor or, city and statewide races, state senator, state congressman, all of those other races. So up and down the ballot, we have great libertarian candidates. Hundreds of, I think actually thousands of them running this year in every single state, in almost every single city and county, from everything from, city council and other city and regional positions, all the way up to Joe and I running for president and vice president. And this campaign has taken an unprecedented amount of interest in pulling up the entire ticket, not just us, but the entire libertarian ticket, because it's not going to, all great libertarian solutions can't just come from, one person in the White House. It has to come from people across governance, across the entire country, affecting change at the local and regional and state and federal level. And so we have been incredibly involved with state and local Libertarian Party affiliates and helping promote down ballot candidates. And in turn, those candidates and grassroots activists working to promote our ticket, the entire party and the entire libertarian movement, presenting ourselves as the only viable alternative to the Republicrats and their failed big government ideas. So, let's see here. How can you and Joe get the cost of medication down? This is an easy one. And it's actually infuriating how easy this is. The only thing that is in place that is allowing these companies to jack up the cost of their drugs 10, 20, 30 times, sometimes 100 times what they used to be, the very second they see that demand's up, is that there are patent protections that allow them to do this. If we remove those protections and we make it so that they have to keep the price affordable or else someone else can make it too, that ends that problem right off the bat. It is not a problem of, government's not regulating enough. It's just the opposite. Government has regulated too much, and they've allowed it so that the crony pharmaceutical companies, and in some cases, it's not even the pharmaceutical companies. It will be outside venture capital companies who will come in, buy a pharmaceutical company, gut the research and development department, gut the marketing department, and leave only in place their patent enforcement people, their lawyers to enforce their trademarks and patents, and production and distribution. And they jack up the price 10, 20-fold. They're actually destroying pharmaceutical companies and making it so there are fewer new drugs out there to help us, because they aren't interested in that. They're just interested in existing drugs that they can jack up the price on and make us pay out the tooth for, and make our insurance companies pay for. And that doesn't just drive up the cost of your personal healthcare and your personal the pharmaceuticals you need. It drives up the cost of Medicare, it drives up the cost of Medicaid, it drives up the cost of insurance, all of these insurance plans, it drives up the cost of state insurance plans, so the cost of government labor goes up. It drives up costs across the board. Simply removing those protections takes care of that problem. And it's infuriating eradicating the number of people who have had problems of getting insulin and epinephrine, things that they need to survive, HIV medications, cancer medications, things that have been around forever, things that have been around for a very long time because they can't afford it or there's not enough of it. We've watched it with there was a run on hydroxychloroquine. And if, when they find a drug that will be an effective treatment for COVID, there will probably be a run on that because there's a restriction on who can make it based on patent protections. Ending that ends all of that. Vote Tim O'Connor for New York State Senate District 51. Yeah. Is the CDC corrupt? Well, I'll tell you one thing. The CDC, like we were just talking about, they stopped the medical community from containing this virus. So you judge for yourself if that's corruption. Let's see. I've answered all of these. What are your plan for the Electoral College? The thing with the Electoral College, again, that requires a change in the Constitution. That requires an actual constitutional amendment to be able to change that. Our plan for the Electoral College is to win it. And our greater plan is to change the cultural conversations so that no matter how they change the electoral system, we still win it because the majority of people want what we want. They want to set America free. They want to remove the bad, failed, centrally planned, arbitrary, crony-friendly ideas that the Republicans and Democrats have forced upon us. And then that way they can change the system to whatever they want. We'll still win it because the people want it. The people want libertarian ideas. They want to be free. Is all taxation theft? Yes. Let's see here. What do you think of UBI? So UBI, Universal Basic Income, acknowledges a problem with our monetary system. It acknowledges that what we have right now is what we just saw with this bailout that just happened, with this stimulus package or relief package that just happened. The government gave us $1,200 or $500 for if we had any kids. And they gave trillions of dollars in bailouts to Wall Street, big businesses, banks, airlines, hotel chains, big companies. The rest of us got $1,200. They gave universal basic income to billionaires to make sure their bottom line wasn't affected. What UBI says is instead of doing that and instead of having these really labyrinthian systems of welfare state, if instead we simply get rid of all of that and just give everyone a check every day, a check every month, or a direct payment or whatever every month, that should meet most of their basic needs, regardless of how much money they make. If they don't make a single penny, if they're the richest person in the country, doesn't matter. They get the same amount every single month. Is it better than the current system? I leave you to judge that. Here's the problem with UBI. It is inherently inflationary. It's every bit as inflationary as our current plan, but it's also inflationary in a much more exponential way, and here's why. If all of us are used to getting $1,000 a month, the price of everything is going to go up to meet that. The market is going to say, wait a second, everyone's got $1,000 more. The price goes up. The other reason the price goes up isn't just because providers drive up the cost of things. It's because in order to give you $1,000 a month, the Federal Reserve has to print out that money and distribute it out give it to the federal government to distribute it out. But that money didn't come out of nowhere. It has to be lent to the government. And so that has to be paid back with interest. So now you've got to pay that interest off. So that's driving up the cost right there. Also, anytime you inflate the monetary supply, you add more money to the money supply, but you don't add any additional value. It drives down the value of all of those Federal Reserve notes that you have in your pocket and in your wallet and in your bank account that you just got a $1,000 check out of, that you use to buy the goods and services you need to survive. Everything you can think of that you spend money on. Rent, your mortgage, your phone service, your food, your clothing, everything that you buy. And that's why the cost of living continuously goes up. Well, if you add UBI and you make it so that people are getting a fixed amount of money, which is going to make the cost of living snowball even higher, now the amount of money they have to give you goes up. So $1,000 becomes $1,500, becomes $2,000, becomes $3,000, becomes $5,000, becomes $10,000, and it goes on and on and on and on because it has to. Not because we're being greedy. It just has to match up with the cost of inflation. And you end up in a situation where you're not going to be able to keep up with it. The government's not going to be able to keep print. What, they can give everyone $1 billion a day? Because what happens is over time, as the cost of living goes up, naturally as a result of this ever expanding amount of money going into the money supply, you will end up with exponential increases to the cost of living. And we've seen this happen in places like Venezuela and Greece and Zimbabwe and the Weimar Republic in Germany, where bad inflationary policies make it so that the money's worthless. It's worth less than the cloth or paper it's printed on. And so while UBI may be better than other systems, in the long term, it actually creates a hyperinflationary system. The answer to that is sound money. Get the government out of the issuance of currency so that instead of just being able to print out endless reams of money for whatever political purposes they want and driving down the value of your money, instead allow private and competing providers to compete to provide you with the best, the most sound, the most valuable currency, because they have a vested interest in you using the currency, so they get a piece of it every time you use it. So now instead of them printing out endless reams of money, which they know will make you stop using their currency and start using someone else's, now they will have a vested interest in doing whatever they can to make that currency as valuable as possible. Imagine a situation in which the cost of living goes down over time, or at least doesn't go up. That's what we would have with sound money. How will you tax small business? We won't. What is your top priority when elected? Joe's top priorities: ending the wars, bringing the troops home, ending the war on drugs, ending police brutality, ending the militarized police state, healing the rift between the police and the public, getting government out of healthcare so that we can afford it again, getting government out of education so we can afford it again. These are her top things, and many others as well. How can we ensure that Joe gets all the attention she needs? This is an excellent question. This is the core of it. How do we get Joe in front of as many people as possible so they can see her shine and see how she is the clearest and best choice for America? The best thing you can do, share this kind of stuff. Share this video, share Joe's videos, share our content. Talk with your friends and loved ones about why you're a libertarian. And if you haven't joined the Libertarian Party already, please do go to lp.org/join and join your state and local affiliates. This is going to be a grassroots-driven campaign. It is going to be at the grassroots, retail politicking level that we're going to win this race. We're going to awaken people to the message of liberty and to the message of being set free, solving the problems that the Republicans and the Democrats have created. That will be the way forward. If you go to our website, joj2020.com. That's joj2020.com. You can sign up to be a volunteer. Please be patient. We have tens of thousands of people signing up to be volunteers, and we're getting through those applications as quickly as possible. But again, also join your local LP affiliate. They'll probably have stuff for you to do right away. And if you're able to contribute, we would greatly appreciate any contribution you can make. Anything you give allows us to be able to pay for us to do these tours and to fight for ballot access and to help down-ballot candidates and to do promotions and videos and everything else we need to do. Any contribution you can make would be greatly appreciated. There's a donate button at joj2020.com. What is your stance on Bitcoin? It's a perfect example of look at how Bitcoin has done compared to the Federal Reserve note over the last 10 years. I rest my case. How can we get teachers to vote for Joe? This is a good one. So a lot of people think that because Joe wants to get the federal government out of education and get the cronies out of education so that your healthcare, your education decisions for your children are made between you as a parent and the teacher for the betterment of your children. A lot of people think that means that teachers aren't going to do well because it'll be, less funding. But where is the funding going? When you look at what the federal government's spending money on, it's not on teachers. It's on administrators. It's on boondoggle programs that cronies have come up with to waste federal dollars, your money that's stolen from you, your money that's printed out by the Federal Reserve and lent to the federal government for you to pay the interest off of. It's being spent on your money, and it's being spent on administrators. It's being spent on stuff that has not helped the education system. Since the federal government got involved in education, the literacy rate has actually gone down slightly. Not dramatically, but it hasn't gone up. Trillions have been spent. Over $1 trillion has been spent on education at the federal level. One would think that would lead to increased literacy. It has not. It's actually led to a slight decrease in literacy. We look at laws like No Child Left Behind, which is really just federal standardized testing that has left many countless children behind. So getting government out of healthcare, getting government out of healthcare too, but getting government out of education, it allows those teachers to have more say in the education. It allows for them to have more latitude to do what they need to without some, imposed federal system on them. And in that way, it makes their job easier, and it allows them to work directly with the parents for the betterment of their students. And the less money, because a lot of that, the states are also required to spend matching funds on those same failed systems. That's less money that goes to teachers. So teachers don't benefit from this. Cronies benefit from this. And bureaucrats benefit from this. Can we make you a meme? You and many others, friend. You are free to. There's a lot of memes of me out there. Are you and Joe pro-LGBTQ? Yes, absolutely. The Libertarian Party is pro-LGBTQ. We are pro-gender and sexual minorities. We recognize you own yourself. You have bodily autonomy. It is no one's business who you love. It is no one's business what gender you are. It is no one's business anything about your life, including your gender and sexual identity. It is no one's business. And if you have every right to be who you are, and there's no reason not just for LGBTQ. We all have a right to be who we are. And unfortunately, up until recently, it was illegal. In many cases, to be LGBTQ, and many gender and sexual minorities still face disproportionate harms at the hands of the state. And so we would absolutely protect your civil rights the way we would protect anyone else's. Do you support homeschoolers? Absolutely. Hamburgers or hot dogs? Why are these the toughest questions? Man, here's the problem. When I think hamburgers and hot dogs, I don't think like McDonald's. I'm thinking like, a Hebrew National hot dog versus like, a really nice, prime USDA hamburger. Man, I'm going to do the political thing and say both. I'm already a politician. It's terrible. I guess hamburgers. I guess a real nice medium rare hamburger. Yeah. So will you all have ballot access in all 50 states? Right now we are at, I believe, 36, which is a good pace to have at this point. One of the biggest challenges we have right now is that a lot of states require a certain number of petition signatures in order for us to be able to be on the ballot. And depending on the state, even in normal conditions, those thresholds of the number of signatures we need is really high. Especially when you consider that the state election boards try their best to disqualify as many of those signatures as we can. So whatever the number is, typically they're trying to get like double that number or close to double that number just to, make sure they don't have they don't get disqualified. In the best of conditions, that's hard. In a situation where there's a pandemic and where large gatherings aren't allowed and where a lot of people do not want to answer their doors and where it may even be illegal for you to go door to door and try to get them to sign something, it's really, really hard. And so this campaign and the Libertarian Party are at the forefront of filing lawsuits and fighting tooth and nail for that ballot access to be able to get ballot access relief. We believe these state governments should allow us on the ballots. We qualified in 2016 for all 50 ballots. There's no reason to think we wouldn't have qualified in normal conditions under 2020. They do not make the Republicans and Democrats do any of this, which is completely unfair. And we believe that we and other third parties should get ballot access relief. It is an ongoing fight. It costs tens of thousands of dollars to fight it in every single state. So if this is something that's near and dear to your heart, we ask for your contributions. If you go to lp.org/ballot access, you can get a day-to-day update on exactly how things are going and the thresholds of what we need. You can also donate to our campaign, and we are helping with ballot access as well. That's JOJ2020, joj2020.com, and press the donate button. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, Sunday is my birthday, and I am turning 38. And I know you're already asking, Spike, that's fantastic. What can I get you for your birthday? Well, what a coincidence. The thing you can get me for my birthday, which would make me so happy, is if you make a donation to this campaign. And 38, what a great number to give. What a great, it's not really a round number, but we'll call it one. It's an even number. What a great number to give to help this campaign. 38 for 38. That's what we're going to call it. We don't actually have a name for this, but we'll call it 38 for 38. I'm turning 38. And you can give 38 and help the campaign. And that'll help for all the stuff we're talking about. For ballot access, for viral videos, for video production, for getting, for doing tours, for getting in front of, organizing events. All of this stuff costs money. And so, if you're able to donate, that would be amazing. JOJ2020.com, 38 for Spike. That's what we'll call it, 38 for Spike. We'll work on that. We'll come up with a better title. But please, if you're able to donate, that would be helpful. Thank you. Are you in your basement like Joe Biden? Is Joe Biden in his basement when he's doing those? No. I live in Myrtle Beach, where if I had a basement, it would just be underwater. Because like the water table here, I think we're like a foot above sea level where we are. We're like a few blocks from the ocean. I am in our flex room, which is where the pool table is. It's also the guest room. It's also where my media is set up. It's where I go to do all this stuff and do everything. But it's not a basement. I guess it functions like a basement, though. But it's not a basement. It's above ground. Let's see. If we don't have money, can we mail you a beer? I mean, I guess you can. Actually, I don't know. Can you mail beer? Well, first of all, if you have the beer, just give us the money. Like, instead of buying the beer and paying for the postage to ship us beer, just give us the money. That's way more efficient. And I'm not 100% sure that I don't think you can actually mail beer. Campaign yard signs. So we are working on the branded merchandise. Now, there already is some stuff, branded merchandise at lpstore.org, but we are working on getting branded merchandise, including signs and hats and all the stuff out as soon as possible. Let's see here. Should we reform welfare? Here's the biggest thing we should do. Because I've done door knocking tours, and I know Joe has met with many people in marginalized communities, and I've done door knocking tours and housing projects. And the one thing that I have heard time and time again, and I'm sure Joe's heard the same thing, these folks don't want to be on welfare. The trope that they're lazy and that they just want assistance, they don't want to do anything. It's patently false. They don't want to live in substandard housing. They don't want to, be worried about if their food stamp card makes it to the end of the month. That's not how they want to live. No one wants to live that way. They don't want to feel like they're not contributing anything. They don't want to see people looking down on them when they pull out their EBT card. They don't want that. They want to thrive and move ahead. But there's a problem. If you look at all the barriers that have been set up by the Republicans and Democrats, that basically force them into generational poverty. If you want to get ahead in life by being an entrepreneur, and let's say you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to braid hair or cut hair, you want to start a lawn mowing company, you want to be an electrician, you want to be a plumber or a handyman, you have to spend thousands or in some cases tens of thousands of dollars in getting the required diploma and then getting the required licensing and getting all the required permits and everything to do it. That's before you spend a single penny on the actual business itself. And so you end up in a situation where if you don't have that money and you're not going to get a nice business loan like the cronies get from the Fed and from the big banks, you can't do it. Or you do it illegally and hope you don't get caught. Or you end up on assistance. And if you want to go the other way and you want to get, do higher education and become a doctor or a lawyer or, do something on the professional level, same thing. You got to spend many, many, many years in school. You have to run up tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt if you don't have it. And if you drop out or you're not able to do as well as you thought, you still got to pay those loans off because they're owned by the federal government. You can't get out of them. It is nearly impossible to declare bankruptcy to get out of them. You're having to pay them regardless. So this is a punishment. They're literally criminalizing trying to get ahead unless you're already financially secure enough to do so. And so, people like to talk about, they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But what they don't say is that there's a $100,000 bootstrap license fee that they have to pay before they can do it. So if we remove those burdens and those barriers that are keeping people in generational poverty, the vast majority of them aren't going to be on welfare. Not because we cut welfare, but because they won't need it. They'll be living great. They'll be entrepreneurs. They'll be building a financial legacy for themselves and their families and their loved ones, building up their communities. And it's a fantastic thing. We just need to get government out of the way. So that's our way of handling that. How good of a pool player are you? I could be better. How will you beat Mike Pence in a debate? Same way I'll beat Kamala Harris, exposing their records. See, Republicans and Democrats are used to not really having to defend themselves. They do the rope-a-dope thing. They do the good cop, bad cop shell game where, one side attacks the other side for basically doing what they do. And the other side goes, how dare you? You're this and that, even though that describes them just as well. It'll be easy for me because when Kamala Harris calls Mike Pence, and I'm assuming it's Kamala Harris, whoever has the misfortune of being Joe Biden's running mate, we'll just add Kamala Harris as a stand-in because that's looking increasingly likely. When Senator Harris calls Vice President Pence a hypocrite and a corrupt person, and he calls her the same, I'll be like, yeah, no, they're both right. They're terrible. And then I'll expose their records and I'll ask some tough questions. Perfect example. I'll ask Mike Pence if he still thinks that, government should be able to electrocute gay people for being gay and shock them until they aren't gay anymore by electricity. And then I'll ask Kamala Harris why she withheld exculpatory evidence illegally in a capital murder case. Here was someone that was on trial for murder, who she knew was not guilty. And he faced being executed for it. And she didn't release the evidence that would have gotten him off as a prosecutor. She didn't release that evidence. She even tried not to release the evidence after a judge ordered her to. She tried to illegally withhold evidence that was the difference between a man being killed or not. So I'll ask her about that. That'll be fun. Let's see what's here. Is Spike a nickname? Yes, my legal name is Jeremy. I have been Spike since I was 3. How will you address immigration to Trump supporters? This is a fantastic question. Here is what the average person who wants border protection is concerned about, that I hear overwhelmingly. They are worried that they're going to lose their job to an immigrant. They are worried that immigrants are going to bring, and we'll even specifically illegal immigrants, but just immigrants, illegal or otherwise, are going to bring crime and danger to their communities. They are worried that immigrants are going to come and use up the welfare system and drive up the cost of welfare and take away. I often hear, we need to help homeless veterans and people, poor Americans who were born here, not people from other countries. These are all concerns that on their face are understandable concerns to have. Thankfully, we have the facts on our side. So we know that in the Constitution, there's no mention of migration or controlling immigration. And of course, that means the 10th Amendment says that anything that isn't explicitly mentioned in the Constitution is best left to the state, or actually has to be left to the states, or preferably the individual people. That's why for the first 100 years of the United States' existence under the Constitution, there were no restrictions on immigration. The first restrictions on immigration came from the Chinese panic, the fear that Chinese people were going to come here and overrun us. And so they introduced laws against Chinese migration. And the first immigration laws that tried to be introduced, they were struck down as unconstitutional because they were, until finally the Democrats were able to get enough appointed justices in place so that the justices said, we can. The government can limit immigration because technically immigration is a type of commerce. Well, no, it isn't. Commerce is the trading of goods and services for money. It is not people going across a line. That same twisted redefinition of commerce is what the Supreme Court has used for the war on drugs and gun control and Obamacare and pretty much every terrible infringing rule that you can think of. It started with immigration. Now, let's look at the facts on immigration. People are worried about if immigrants are going to come here and get on welfare. Well, thankfully, we know from the data that immigrants, including illegal immigrants, are actually much less likely to use public assistance and welfare and other public programs and social safety nets than native-born Americans of the same income levels. So we know that they're not coming here to get on welfare. Some of them end up on welfare, usually because when they get here, those same burdens and barriers are in place. And unless they're doing it illegally on the side, they can't get around the burdens. And so they end up on public assistance. But if you remove those burdens, that's not a problem anymore. They're coming here to work. They're coming here to do, a lot of them are coming here, the majority of them are coming to do seasonal labor and then go right back home. They go and do the farm work and then they go right back home. So we know that they're not coming for welfare. The worry about crime. We know that immigrants, including illegal immigrants, are significantly statistically less likely to commit violent crime than the average native-born America. And there are many factors and reasons for this, but they are. I know when my dad's side of the family came here, that was the same stuff they were told. These were foreign people with their foreign religion and their dirty ways, and they are going to come and they're going to bring crime, and they're going to come and they're going to live off of us because they're lazy. That's not what happened. And that's not what's happening now. But we need to speak to their concerns, because one of the concerns is, again, am I going to lose my job? And the answer to that is ask the cronies who made the restrictions that made it so that you had to rely on them for a job in the first place, and which at the very and which drove up the cost of hiring you legally, so that now they can go and hire someone illegally, which is something they know they can do because they can afford the fines. But they know that small businesses can't afford it because they'll lose everything. So now the small businesses are stuck either hiring you at a much higher cost than hiring someone illegally, or just going out of business, or folding and becoming a part of that bigger business. And so the bigger business can hire people illegally because they drove up the cost of hiring you. And so if you remove those restrictions, now it's not unaffordable to hire you. That's the problem. The government barriers are the problem. This guy coming over to do seasonal farm labor, because that's the other thing. The majority of work that people are coming over to do isn't work that Americans are doing anyway, because it's not very high wage work, and it's sometimes pretty brutal work that they're doing. But even in the cases where they are coming over to do work that you're doing, the government and their cronies have priced you out of being price competitive. That's the problem. Not this guy trying to get ahead in life, not this family trying to escape persecution. They're just coming over trying to make a better life. They're no threat to you. It's the people who have tried to make you unemployable and unaffordable because they want you to be reliant on them for basic goods and services. They're the problem. So we get rid of that. How old am I? Well, we just talked about this. I'm 37, but I'm going to be 38 on Sunday. And what a great time to, I'm sure you love me already and want to give to me for my birthday. So what a great way to give, to donate $38 to the Jorgensen Cohen campaign by going to joj2020.com. That's joj2020.com. Pressing that donate button and picking $38 or whatever you want to give. You can give $3.80. You can give $380. You can give you can't give $3,800. That's the max is $28. So you can give $2,800. But you can give $38. And that would be great for my birthday. What do you think about DACA? I think that it's the federal government deciding who can and can't be here. I think that here's the other part of that when it comes to immigration enforcement. Immigration controls are a violation of your right to host, hire, or house whomever you wish on your property and to travel to properties where you're welcome. It's a violation of your rights. And we see the police state that has already been created to try to enforce that. We see how if you want to get a job, it has to be run through a federal identification program. It's used as an excuse to force you to have a biometrics ID on you at all times. It's you see the massive police state that's been put on the border. Countless acres of land seized through eminent domain, seized from private landowners to build walls and to build crossing checkpoints and everything else to keep people out. But it also could keep you in. It's a massive violation of your rights, and people are still coming in illegally. If you think of the kind of massive police state that would have to be built even bigger than the one that we have, and the massive surveillance state and the number of laws and heavy enforcement on and infringements upon you to be able to effectively keep people from coming here illegally. I don't think you want to live in that world. That's a fortress state that you would have to live in to be able to have that. Why not instead just remove the burdens that make you unemployable or increasingly more expensive to employ? Why not instead allow you to associate with people as you wish? I think that's a much fairer system. So did the founders. That's why they didn't put any restrictions for migration in the Constitution. And in fact, restrictions on migration and trade were one of the stated reasons in the Declaration for Independence that they were declaring themselves independent from the crown. It was one of the reasons was that the king was closing the borders. So open borders to as much trade and migration as we as individual people want is as American as apple pie. It's actually more American than apple pie, because I don't believe apple pie is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, but I may be wrong. What do you think about Justin Amash? I think he's been a great congressman. I am very supportive of his reelection. I think it is fantastic that he is introducing amazing tripartisan legislation. We now have a word, tripartisan. Tripartisan is now a thing. Legislation to end qualified immunity. I'm glad, I'm honored that he is taking the helm of that and getting both Democrats and Republicans signed on to holding bad government officials and bad police accountable, so that good police can work their way up in the rank. Let's talk about qualified immunity for a second, because we already talked about it briefly. It allows bad officers not to be held accountable, and it punishes good officers because there's no recourse for the bad officers. It also does this. Derek Chauvin, the man who killed George Floyd, he had 17 other complaints against him, including wrongful death complaints. And because of qualified immunity, he was not held responsible. Now, the Minneapolis Police Department more than likely looked at his record and said, this guy's terrible. What a terrible cop. He's doing a terrible, terrible job. He's brutalizing the public. But it's not costing us anything because of qualified immunity. And if we try to fire him, we're going to have to fight the police unions. And that's going to cost a lot of money. So I guess we just got to keep him. And if he gets prosecuted for something, then we can get rid of him. Otherwise, we just got to hold on to him. Qualified immunity incentivizes bad policing and creates a cost-benefit analysis in every police department in this country where they keep on bad cops because it costs too much to get rid of them. So that's a problem. Do you play video games? I used to, but now I campaign full time, so I don't do much of anything other than campaigning. Let's see here. Do you be in any podcast shows soon? I am on so many podcast shows. I love it. I love campaigning and I love podcasting. In fact, tonight I'm going to be on Our Nation with one Ryan Jenkins, the host of Our Nation, who is an absolutely fantastic young man. He is 12 years old. He is one of my favorite libertarians, and he is actually involved in our social media team, in the Joe Jorgensen, Spike Cohen social media team. He's a fantastic kid. He is great. During the convention, he actually gave one of the nominating speeches, and I was blown away by him. He's a fantastic kid, and I will be on his show. I'll be on it at 9 p.m. Eastern, and then he'll release it once it's ready to go, and we'll be sharing that on my page as well. So you'll see that. But yes, I'm on a lot of. If you follow my page, Spike Cohen, you'll see I am on a lot of podcast interviews, and I also have two shows that I do. I have a show that I do shows that I do twice a week. My Fellow Americans and The Muddy Waters of Freedom. Well, it is now. Let's see. Is there any more I missed? Because it's 8:04. A lot of these are kind of repeats of the same questions. Ryan, do we have like one more new question, and I'll answer that, and then we'll sign off. Cause yeah, I see. What do you think about DACA? How old are you? Podcast shows. Oh, here's one. What is your stance on Social Security? Well, it's a Ponzi scheme, and it's a situation that was set up where you pay in and you pay in and you pay in. And if you live long enough to retire, then you get out what they say they'll give you. It is a Ponzi scheme. So your money is not being put in its own account. It's just being thrown into a central, fund and then given out as needed. And the problem is there's no accountability there, because as the natural age as the age of the average age expectancy goes up, which means that the longer people are retired and on Social Security for longer periods of time, which means that you see the number of people getting on or collecting Social Security continues to outstrip the number of new people paying into Social Security, which makes it unsustainable, which is why Ponzi schemes are illegal. It's why pyramid schemes are illegal. So, interesting fact, if you or I were to set up a retirement plan and we structured it verbatim exactly the same way that Social Security is set up, we would go to jail for racketeering and Ponzi scheming. So the question is, now that tens of millions of Americans rely on Social Security, now what? Because sure, we can say as libertarians, okay, end Social Security right now. It's unsustainable and it should have never been. Sorry, Grandma, no more checks for you. That's going to lead to massive amounts of harm, which not only is bad, but also from a political standpoint, all those people are going to hate us and vote against us. So it's not politically feasible, nor I'm not sure I'd argue it's moral to just end Social Security. These are people that paid into Social Security. It's not their money they're getting back. It's someone else's, but they paid into it. And it is what it is. So I believe that what we need to be doing, and this is Joe's plan as well, allow people to opt out of Social Security so that we can slowly wean people off over time from the system so that eventually we're not dealing with Social Security anymore. But Joe and I know Joe does not have any appetite or desire to start kicking people off the plan. If there are people that are abusing the plan or something like that, or they're defrauding it, that's one thing. But people who paid into it, they're retired. Here's another perfect example. You're going to tell an 85-year-old to pull themselves up by their bootstraps after they gave almost half of their income to the federal government their entire life. So it is a problem. And the idea is to let people opt out of it slowly over time so that eventually this is not a problem. Okay, this is a great one to close out. Can I give a shout out to Brad Barron running for Senate against Mitch McConnell? I absolutely can. Brad Barron is a fantastic libertarian. He is running for the U.S. Senate in the great state of Kentucky. He is running against Mitch McConnell, a man who arguably is the most powerful man in Washington, D.C., definitely one of the most powerful Machiavellian figures in Washington, D.C. If you want to come up with one person who personifies everything that is wrong with American politics and Washington, D.C. in particular, Mitch McConnell fits that role. And then he will more than likely be facing Amy McGrath on the Democrat side, who the Democrat voters really don't want, but they're kind of having her shoved down their throat. They prefer this other guy named Charles Booker much more. But Amy McGrath's kind of being shoved down their throats. And here you have Brad Barron in the middle, who, if we can get him on that debate stage, it'll be a similar situation like with Joe. If you can get him on that debate stage, it'll be very clear who the best option is. He is a sustainable farmer. He is a serial entrepreneur. He and his wife are fantastic, upstanding people. And he is a libertarian across the board. He wants to set people free and get the boot off the neck of the people, end the drug war, enforce affirm and defend our right to keep and bear arms, end the wars. He will be an amazing ally in Washington as a U.S. Senator. And here's how you can help him. So he needs to be able to qualify for the debate stage. And in order to do that, he needs to raise $100,000, which he can use however he wants for the campaign. That's not going to the debate people. That's going to his campaign so he can spend it campaigning. But he has to raise $100,000 to get on it. And so there is a money bomb going on this weekend to help Brad Barron. So be sure to go to Brad Barron for your U.S. Senate. Look that up on Facebook and give whatever you can. Give as much as you can. After you give as much as you can to him, and give, I'm asking a lot of you. I'm asking you to give to Brad Barron. I'm asking you to give for my birthday to the campaign. But Brad Barron could definitely use your help to be able to qualify for that debate stage. Because if he can get on that stage, he could be our first U.S. Senator. I give him more than even odds of being our next U.S. Senator if that happens. So Give some love to Brad Barron. Share his money bomb. Like him on Facebook. He's also on, I believe he's on Twitter as well. But be sure to like him on Facebook. Share his content. Again, this is a grassroots campaign. We're about supporting up and down the entire ballot. So with that said, it is now 8:10. And so I want the rest of y'all to be able to enjoy your beginning of your weekend here. And I thank you again for tuning in. And I thank you for everything that you are all doing. Things every single day, large and small, that you are doing to help this campaign. You are the grassroots army of liberty. When Joe gets into office and she ends the wars and brings the troops home, it'll be because of you and what you've done. When she ends the drug war and frees people from cages and removes their felony records so they can thrive again, it'll be because of you. When she ends the war on guns and allows you to keep and bear arms as you see fit, it'll be because of you. When she ends police brutality, when she ends the militarized police state, when she helps to heal the rift between the police and the public, when she sets the people free and removes the barriers and burdens that are keeping you down, when she gets government out of healthcare so that the costs go down and we can afford it, when she gets government out of education so that your children have a better education and you and your and the children's teachers are making the decisions on education instead of some cronies and bureaucrats in DC. That'll all be because of you. We will live freer and happier and healthier and safer lives under a Jorgensen administration, and it will be because of you. For her and for all the down ballot races we win together, it'll be because of what you do. You are the army of liberty. You are the power. I want you to have a fantastic weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in.